You're here because you want more engagement, more delight, more fun, more learning. You're hungry for change and willing to take action.
If you're not prepared to be wrong, you'll never come up with anything original.
Welcome to the E-Learning Scenario Design Podcast with Anna Sabramowitz.
I'm going to show you how great I am.
Let's take learning to the next level.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. And today I want to introduce to you Dominique Giguère, and she is somebody very special, and I've known for, this is our first really connected kind of meeting together. So it's wonderful to meet face-to-face finally. So thanks for being here. I appreciate it. Dominique possesses superior leadership and facilitation skills with a contagious drive, passion for learning, accountability, and creativity. She achieved success by integrating academic research and a scientific approach with applied practice in the field. And in the past 20 years, she has facilitated numerous organizational development, action planning, and problem-solving sessions with senior executives and board members. And she is also an accomplished leader of the organization effectiveness and talent management functions, and has designed learning and performance development programs for a wide range of subject matters using the most appropriate delivery method, online, virtual, in class. And I love this line: her nimble yet rigorous approach yields results and leaves organizations ready and able to step into action. And Dominique is the co-CEO of Currents Group, Inc. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
So I basically have a bunch of questions prepared, and if we get through them all, that's totally fine. And one of the things everybody will get to do is find out how to get in touch with you if they want to learn more at the end of this session. So that's awesome. Okay, so let's get started. And so first is one of those, tell me a little bit about yourself. How did you get into the online learning profession, please?
I would say through a natural evolution. So I did initially train as a science teacher. So I started in education, ended up doing a lot of teacher training. And at the time, it was the early beginning, so late 90s. I will date myself. So the beginning of technology, even virtual technology, was starting. Distance learning was continuing to evolve because, of course, distance learning is not new at all. It's over 100 years old. But fell into more workplace development, teacher training. And I think by necessity, because at the time I was working for TV Ontario, and our mandate was to support teachers in their delivery of the science curriculum. So, of course, we did travel as much as we could to each school board, but we tried to use the technology we had through the broadcasting channel that we had to deliver virtual classrooms. And eventually, so I just evolved basically with the technology itself, which eventually, instead of television, we actually went fully online by early 2000s, I guess.
That's a cool start in television, right? Completely weird world. I can only imagine what it was like.
Yes, and it was two-way audio and one-way video. So we've come a long way from that.
Yeah, in some ways, right? Okay.
And to be able to do this in my home office, as opposed to a full-fledged television, production studio, with all the costs and the logistics that involves. So you can imagine the cost of producing the teacher training, and at this, it was never a match with the pace at which we needed to support the teachers, at the pace at which the science curriculum was changing. So it's been wonderful to see the technology evolve, to see the tools just being much more accessible. So you don't have to worry about really, really high production value. You can do something perhaps with less production, but that will be, will be more short-lived, and that's okay. It's a little bit more disposable, but actually less of a carbon footprint than maybe other, fast fashion or fast food. This is fast learning.
I like that. Now, it's kind of interesting. You just said the lower production value. Do you think that is there You know how companies now, when they put together programs, let's say for online learning, do you think that there are, maybe relaxed their standards a little bit around developing learning? Do you think YouTube has anything to do with that? Like as far as, the high video production?
Yeah, I think we've become more accustomed. I think our expectations is more about and so that it's instant, where to the point where you can broadcast live even from your phone. And I think I think generally people have accepted the trade-off. I think people would rather have something a little less polished and but have it when they need it and not wait, 3 months by the time it's written and produced and edited and published. So I think it's a trade-off. I think there is still room. So to me, form follows function. So if it is, and that's a principle I've used, from the beginning, and that's regardless of technology. And so to me, it's always a trade-off. So if it's something that's not going to be used a lot for a long time, do you need it to be at a high cost and take a long time to produce itself? So to me, there has to be a match. And so having said that, what I'm trying to say is that there's room still for high production value if it's for content that is very stable and that is a tool that's going to be published broadly and used broadly and perhaps integrated in another more a course, for example, that has lesser production value. Those videos themselves are worth investing into. So to me, it's a case by case. Each learning piece. Should we do it like today? Should we do it in a makeshift, home office studio, and or should we have a full camera crew here? Well, I think the decision, again, based on purpose and so function and form, the decision becomes more obvious.
I think people do, from basically the feedback that I've received from students. I like this approach because I think that the personal messages that are fleeting can be very candid and low tech. But like you said, they do appreciate when there's an investment made. And it's actually neat how you can mix those two and get away with it still. So that's fun.
Yeah.
So I'm going okay. So one of the things that a lot of people struggle with is relationships with subject matter experts. And so, and I actually get a ton of questions from people about how to design things without the use of subject matter experts.
Oh no!
Well, I feel that's yeah. How can you do that, right?
And well, I get the opposite questions from subject matter experts who say, how can I design something without an instructional designer?
Oh, I know, right? It's like there's no love. There is no love.
Yeah, I know.
So the collaboration piece is very difficult. I'm thinking there's probably some mindsets and maybe some issues with roles and maybe ownership of information and things like that, right? So one question is that people usually say is, and this is the context. Let's say somebody is like an instructional designer is working with a subject matter expert, and what they provide is just what they always provide, or most times, is content, ton of content. So how do you get the subject matter expert to focus on the learning and not on the content per se?
Okay, so my bias here is that I treat content as king or queen. Without content, you have no learning. So to me, that's the starting point. And so as an instructional designer, so joking aside, I cannot develop anything without content. Whereas if we the equation the other way around, the subject matter expert can design learning without me as an instructional designer. So I approach it where I know my role And so I'm very clear about it. And I treat my subject matter expert as kings and queens, because without them, so I think maybe it's a mindset that the relationship that I build with them, that it's the utmost respect for their content and their expertise. And I don't know if that's how it's contributed to successful relationships. I think over time, then they begin to also value that I have expertise. And if we combine our expertise, it's not this love-hate relationship that, oh, I wish I didn't need an SME and the SME, I wish I didn't need. So it's not a codependent relationship. It's not very healthy. I try to convey that it's an interdependent relationship, that the product will be better if we work together. I also emphasize that nowadays, because the expectations are for fast development, it's a huge bonus, in fact, to have a team. And for an SME nowadays to have an instructional designer to work with, and vice versa. So if the project has been set up with those two distinct roles, I make a point of pointing out that it is very special, and the fact that the expertise, like this added layer of expertise, has been invested into the project. So I think, so that to me, that's the mindset. And so there's a certain level of almost like deference, if you'd like, but knowing very well and feeling very solid and strong about my own expertise and how and what I'm contributing. But there is a bit of deference that I try to convey, that, thank you. And I will, my job is to basically be a translator and a bridge and to the learners. And that's all I will attempt to do, with utmost respect for the content and your knowledge. That seems to work well. And I try to convey that in all aspects of the project. That can mean the utmost flexibility, so that I try to always be ready when they are. And in my case, often they can be, subject matter experts can be pulled aside for an urgent project and then have no time for me. And I tried to have several projects on the go so that I don't convey any frustration. And again, content SME is king or queen, and therefore I will take your content when you are ready, and I will take your validation when you are ready. So I try to also establish that rapport, that I will work around your schedule. I understand that's not always possible, but I think it's another way of showing that respect. And it seems the more I show respect, the more I get respect for my expertise. And when I try to say, maybe we don't want to include all of that content, and maybe we don't want to do this, there seemed to be a little bit more openness for that advice.
Cool. It's neat. I feel like the more I'm talking to people who are in this role, there's this humbleness that comes into these relationships that when you enter it with that, it's makes things so much easier. And like you said, it's not about diminishing yourself. It's coming in confident, but having that respect for their contribution. I love that. That's awesome. So like, based on everything that I've read and seen from your past work, which has been mostly about with Doctors Without Borders, it looks like you worked with remote teams. So as you probably know, and I'm just making assumptions, remote teams are harder to make connections on. And also there's everything's really all business, right? So you don't have time at the water cooler. So to chit chat, how do you, if this is true for you, or if you have strategies about how to create that connection with people remotely, what's your approach?
Well, it's funny you would mention the water cooler thing, because I do try to actually take a few minutes and to have that connection, and to talk about the weather, and to talk about, what did you do this weekend? And pardon me. So even if you're on Skype and, the connection is not great, I think having those moments, and to the point of developing the relationship, and if we're in different countries and I'm in I'm in Canada and it's snowing, and of course, my colleagues in South Africa love to see that, and it's taking a moment to turn the camera around and say, this is what it looks like outside right now, and then we end up, over the course of the project, we may end up sharing family photos, and so I think developing that rapport is actually quite possible and important. So I give it as much importance, whether it's online or in person, and have room for chit-chatting. Probably the other key is I plan regular meetings, almost weekly, even if it's for 15 minutes. And I do use any kind of, whatever people prefer, but any kind of dynamic content platform. So it could be like a Google spreadsheet, or that all parties, because in my projects often there will be multiple parties in different countries. So it's not just me who's remote, but all contributors may be in different parts of the world. So having a spreadsheet that at any time has the meeting minutes and action items, and which we can update. Often it happens, as you know, half an hour before the next meeting. Everybody frantically updates what happened in the last week or 2 weeks, which then can lead to the decision not to meet. But there's a 30-minute, at least, bookmarked in everyone's calendar, and you say, oh, everything on schedule, everything good, great, okay, we don't need to chat, or, oh, I just have a question. I don't need to meet, but maybe somebody else would say, I just have one quick question. And so having those placeholders, I think, makes for almost, again, that equivalent of the impromptu drop by someone's desk, and that you would have, in a face-to-face environment, and including messaging, which is also the other way that we replicate the dropping by. So we tend to leave, if we're using Skype primarily, then we'll leave Skype open while we're working, so that I can message someone, or I'm working on this one sentence right now. Are you around? And if the person's around, it would be the same as me dropping by your office and see if you're around, because there's just one word in that sentence I need you to validate. And so we use that, so that can replicate also that casual interaction.
I love that. So do you think that this is a skill set that you've developed, as far as just, almost being strategic about the development of the relationships, that you're like, oh, let's get a little uncomfortable and talk about, in the very beginning, or is that something you're like, are you cognizant of it, or have you just built it into your repertoire?
That's a good question. I think from a project management, even I would say just management or just working relationship, I think that's the key word. It's to me, what seems to facilitate things are the relationships. So how do you develop rapport? Well, it means developing trust. How do you develop trust? It means, opening up the vulnerability a little bit, and say, oh, I was really sick last week, and this, or, my mother-in-law was in the hospital, and taking the time to talk about this and leaving room. So, yeah, so I think it's just, it is a skill set that I've, or an approach that I've always used in all of my work interactions. And I think it's just a matter of translating it and using the tools to allow me to do the same thing. So I think it's an overall just developing good relationships, whether they're close by. I mean, sometimes I joke about the fact that I worked at a college in Toronto, at Seneca College, where we had multiple campuses. And the campuses were maybe, I don't know, some of them 25 kilometers or 40 kilometers apart. And we often spend a huge amount of time traveling. And because, 20K, 10K is not very far. So of course, like, oh, I'll be right over. And when I think back, and I used to say we're too close and not far enough, because really gained anything and actually wasted quite a bit of time, and not to mention, again, the carbon footprint. And in fact, all we needed to do was to, and the reason we wanted to meet was not to be face-to-face, but was to develop that, maintain that relationship, ensure that everybody knew where the project was at, if there were any questions, and not leaving things, for a 3-month update when things have gone off track and things are more dramatic and become more urgent. So yes, almost to try to eliminate even the concept of whether there's distance or whether we're face-to-face or not, and just say, what do I need to make this work? I need good relationships. I need everybody informed, everybody on the same page, and all of it incrementally, so that we don't wait for big things or just in case somebody is not available for a period of time.
So it's already for developing the good relationships remotely. As far as specific tips, what would you say, like if you were to do at least 2 things, if you're just a new instructional designer managing a team that's not near you, what would you suggest?
So definitely some sort of tool, but very, very simple, that provides everybody a way to contribute when they're available, and for everybody to know what is going on and where things are at. So the status at any time, especially if you're dealing with different time zones. And I emphasize the simple tool, and I have brought it down for myself to basic spreadsheets when you have different tabs, and one tab can be heavy about content. The other tab can just be about, notes from the last meeting. Another tab can be about, the latest decisions. And I mentioned that because I have tried, and I've been on projects where we've tried the latest project management tools that are much more sophisticated. We've tried work or teamwork boards that have, all the tasks and the card around, and they tend to work only for that's my experience. So I can only speak from my experience, but most team, we found ourselves reverting back to the good old spreadsheet. So it just seemed like then somebody lost their password, or then forgot to update one thing, or one person didn't realize that this card was supposed to move there. It just seemed to get in the way. And so I would say it is essential for everybody to know where things are at, and to have access easily, and not have different versions of different documents. So whether it's any kind of cloud-based tool for your files. So everybody, you want to avoid any kind of version issues and somebody editing not the final issues. So some sort of cloud, but also very simple, and some sort of centralized spreadsheet or document that allows everybody to know what's going on and where's the ball. Is it my turn now to edit something? So just keep it simple.
I like that. It's funny because I'm kind of a technophile, so I'm always like, hey, can we try new things?
No, and me too. But it's funny to watch the behavior then. But what do we revert back to naturally? And I always go with, the most powerful tool is the one that requires the less effort.
Yes.
The effort in the end. And so I always monitor to see on the team what people are most comfortable with. And you have to find the common denominator. It doesn't have to be the lowest common denominator, but you have to find something that everybody's comfortable with. And there have been teams who were, the project was much more about technology in and of itself. So of course we ourselves wanted to push ourselves and try different tools. But for the average project where you have a mix of people with different background and interest in technology, keeping it simple works well.
Makes sense. No, it does. I can totally relate to that. So when it comes to different cultural contexts, what is your advice there when you're working with remote teams?
So I guess, so not on the design of the course necessarily, but working just on just the interaction and the relationships within the team.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
what you're referring to mostly? Um, the reason I hesitate is because I've tried to actually bring it down to the core, which I was saying earlier about basic relationships, and I find that by de-emphasizing the issue, it becomes more easily integrated. And so what I mean by that is the same as when I was asking the basic questions of what did you do on the weekend, and you get tidbits of what is important to people. And the way I find that cultural differences will have an impact on the project, it will be in the way that people prioritize their time, and like how they see the world, how they see the value of the project, and so I try to, again, just then find out that information of what motivates people, what is most important, and then use that, and not build it as this like we're going to have intercultural differences. So let them emerge, and let it be natural through casual conversation, even about what you made for dinner for your family, and just like letting even what's happening in the family and what's important. And I find like when you bring it down, the basics of human interactions are not that different and what people need to work well together. And I think it is about valuing each other's priorities and what motivates us. And I think so I try to have that almost as part of the project plan. If we have 3 or 4 people working on the team, is for each person to declare what is most important to them about this project. And for one person, it might be the timeliness of it. Well, then from that point on, we will all understand if that person is getting edgy about things being late. And so there won't be a judgment, then we will just know where everybody's coming from. And so again, just trying to not make a big deal of what could be perceived as differences, cultural differences.
I like that approach actually very much. I think there's a lot of people who stress out over these things, and then they blow things out of proportion instead of just trying to get to know somebody. There are certain, and you've mentioned them, there are certain commonalities amongst differences, which is like, how would you prioritize your time? How would you, what are you okay with how late things are? Some people are okay having things late, so, and that's okay. That's just, you plan for that. You're like, okay, I'm going to give you a different deadline. We're going to give you 2 weeks.
So it's finding out what is important. In some contexts, the hierarchy, for example, can be, and the process of decision making can be really important. So again, in the parameters, in the initial setup of the project, agreeing on what the validation process will be and who makes what decision is a way of respecting that as well. And so that's why that's I don't know if I call it a tool, but that's an approach that I definitely include in the project planning stages of who are all the stakeholders and what is most important to each stakeholder. So we can anticipate what everybody, understand what everybody's motivation is, and anticipate then a project plan that will fit everybody's motivation.
Yeah. I mean, I find that cultures change from organization to organization. It doesn't have to be a border, right? Like just
exactly. And from professional field, like from a medical field to an accounting field so that's why I've tried to almost just look at, these are people.
Yeah.
And regardless of country or medical or professional background. So as a human being, there's a reason they're on this project, and there's something that will motivate them, and there's something that is most important to them. So let's get that on the table.
Yeah. So, and you've worked with projects with e-learning and the gamut, right? So, how do you deal with a client that, so let me just read this specifically instead of ad-libbing. Another big problem in the e-learning industry is the client who doesn't know what they want until they see it. So how do you balance the planning required with the need to show a client working software sooner than later? What's your approach there?
I can think of a couple of things I would rely on. One is having almost like a catalog of, and I, sometimes with some SMEs, I say, let me walk you through the candy store, and you can walk up and down the aisles and see what you like. And I watch their responses and see, oh, I really like this. Or, so what I'm getting at is like having a large portfolio, and not just of my own work, but other work online, and showing them different style. Would you like this? Would you like that? And so at least it gives me some hints of what they are responding to, almost viscerally, so that's how I can tell there's a match between the style and their content. And because they are the ones who are the experts, and they know what's appropriate, and sometimes in some fields, like something more humorous and cartoony is not appropriate at all. And so it's good to see them. So I think a catalog is a very useful tool. And I've completely forgotten what my second one was, because I know they're, because that's the main one that I use is to give them options. Oh, I know. So the second one is to do very, very rough mock-ups and quasi prototypes, and to have, so we're not investing too much time. And so if we're going down the wrong path, then we have not wasted any time. But a really, really rough mock-up or a storyboard, and even if it's a sketch by hand, and to be able to say, and so what about this? And what about? So I think not being afraid of that kind of trial and error at the beginning, because they don't know what they don't know. So I think a catalog of finished product first, to see their reactions, just to get a sense of what they like and what seems appropriate for the content. And then secondly, very quick, a menu of options. Well, what about this one or that one? But really rough, don't invest too much time in those.
It's funny because sometimes I think that even you can have the same basically learning activity, but you skinned it a little bit differently. And hey, I like that. It makes them feel like they have that choice and input, right? So I get that. Yeah,
it's like, I want one of those.
Yes, and you're like, oh, you want the red card? You want still a car.
Yes, exactly.
So most training tries to cover too much. And how do you decide what the critical skills are to, let's say, create a simulation around versus going to performance support?
Yeah, that's a big
loaded
question. So only because I guess I'm responding to my own biases and field, because it is one of my pet peeves in the field is not doing a good needs analysis. And without that, then you're unable to make those prioritization decisions about content. So without going on my rant on that, I will say that first off, so my bias, and so I have over time specialized much more in workplace learning. So in this context, I'm talking about online learning for the purposes of professional development and performance support for work. And I'm making a strong distinction with education, where you're in school and the parameters are completely different, because as you know, then your performance is going to be assessed differently, and the reward is different, and the point is different, because you're not necessarily going to apply right away, or it's not, the stakes are different. To me, they're two different currencies that you're trading. So for the sake of my answer here, I'll focus on workplace learning. And so learning required for me to do work. And that's where I work with the SME I usually let them share all of their content and say, I want to see it all. I want to learn it all. I want to swim in it so I can get a feel for it. So that's one thing. And I think that contributes to valuing the content also and the respect for all of the content. Then we park that, and the second step is, and sometimes you may need to work with somebody in human resources or another department to say, now tell me about the job. Why do I need to do this? So who needs to do this? Oh, it's it's a pharmacist in the field doing an inventory. Okay, so tell me the story. So the pharmacist shows up at work that morning. What happens? And so really emphasizing with them and have them tell me the story of the work. It's in our field, if we want to be technical, it's, whether you want to call it a task analysis or a needs assessment. And so I try to so it's just a way of for them to transition in that mindset, because I find that they themselves, when they say, okay, so in order to do the work and do a good job, do I need this piece of information? So let's say, and we were doing an HIV course, and it was for a clinician going to the field. They're already qualified, but they haven't worked necessarily in under-resourced country and not in an HIV context. Well, there was an entire module, probably of 6 hours, if we had put it all online, that was about the history of HIV and the so the evolution of the disease, and very interesting, very important, put in the frame of, tell me the story of when I'm in a clinic and I'm seeing a patient. What is my task? So task number one, let's say, is to prescribe something. How much of the history do I need of HIV of the last 50 years do I need in order to make the best, and write the best prescription most appropriate for this patient? And when I'm able to help them focus on the work, what do you want to see? Or sometimes I say, what is the problem that you see? So that's another one that they are very keen to explain. Oh, well, everybody prescribes the wrong thing. Oh, well, why do they prescribe the wrong thing? Well, it turns out that as you discuss that, it has nothing to do with the history of HIV. So
what a surprise.
So without me having to say anything, they're able. So I said, well, so what do they need to know to make the best decision? Why are they making that mistake? Oh, it's because they don't know the difference between this and that. Okay, well, let's make that the learning objective of the module. And so with them, what I'm doing is really just writing and bringing it back to a competency or performance based model. And so they can tell me what the work tasks are. And then in the next column say, well, in order to do this task, what do I need to know or be able to do? And I often add a column in that analysis and planning document where I say, and where are the errors that they make? Because we are talking about work, and errors in many fields, not just medical, are really critical and have a really important impact. So what I find is that as they go through that, the other content sort of falls off the table, and it doesn't seem to hurt as much. And I always say that it's not that we're not going to put it there, but we're going to put it as additional information, and we're going to put a little prompt in it and say, if you'd like to know, because of course the history does have, ultimately, you can connect the dots to the prescription and why there's some issues with prescribing A instead of B. In the moment of performing the task, not so much. In the big picture and the more educational setting, would it help if they knew the big picture? Yes, of course it would, if they have the time, when they have the time. So I still include it, but more in I managed to have them the conclusion, and have them differentiate what is needed to do the work and what is a nice to know as complementary big picture information.
I like the language you used to extract this information from the subject matter experts, because I think that there might be sometimes where we assume this person knows something about education or that they speak our language. Like when we say outcomes, learning outcomes, we think they know what that means or how to formulate that. But when you say, give me a story of this person and give me the problem that they're facing, how are they making mistakes? Those are things that they're already on their mind, probably, right? They get that. So it's like putting it in the language that they feel comfortable sharing in. And because most times if you say, give me the learning outcomes, they're going to go back to the content and say, identify B, recall this, right?
Yeah, so, and the history of HIV and
exactly. So it's cool you have this because I always feel like there are learners who love to geek out and check out the more info and learn about the history.
Yes.
So why not include it? But this way,
absolutely,
this is this beautiful approach where you're not like when the SME comes in with their information, you believe it is very important to them. You don't dismiss that, but then through that conversation, you discover the most important pieces. Very fun.
Yes.
So
I don't know if you'll have a question, but I couldn't be on the record without a tiny little rant then on the performance analysis, and ensuring that, and that's why I insist on a lot of questions around the performance and what errors are, like, why did you want this training or learning tool in the first place? What is happening? And I really insist on getting the backstory. And if there's an issue, so through the story, most of the time, I end up doing much more of a, holistic performance assessment. And I'm able to help them point out that some of what is happening is not, and what they're seeing and what has led them to want this learning tool may not be related to knowledge or skills or attitudes. And it's not something that can be taught. It could be something that has to do with processes, has to do with resources, has to do with structure, with systems. And that's where I think the big aha moment in my career, where I was able to step back and take the time and not value my work based on quantity of me being able to respond to every demand for learning opportunities to design and deliver, but to actually ensure that before I said yes and before we delivered it, we actually worked through a process to say that the problem you're seeing is actually there is an answer connected to learning. And most of the time, I would say it's a combination of multiple factors. And I tell all of my learning and development colleagues that we do a disservice to our field if we just say yes to whatever request and ignore the other factors, because there's a good chance. Actually, I think it jeopardizes the integrity of the profession, because it's like a car mechanic, and you going in, you don't know anything and say, it's making a noise, can you fix it? Yep. And perhaps it has nothing to do, but maybe he'll make a few bucks and just by fixing your car, when in fact it had nothing to do mechanical. But so the point is almost there's something about the integrity of the profession to say, can I actually address your need? Just because you came to me with a request doesn't mean that I can and I should. My other point then is the dignity of the learners, because if we haven't done a proper diagnosis of why they're having difficulty performing a certain task, we may end up putting workers in a workshop or asking them and making stuff even worse, mandatory online, that is insulting to them because it has nothing to do with their skills. And the famous example I always use is the infection rate that was increasing in the hospital, and then the nurses being mandated to attend an infection control workshop. when they finally took the time to analyze what was really going on, was that the soap containers were always empty just before the end of a shift. So in the last hour of the nurse's shift, there was no soap, and it had nothing to do with their skills. It was something in this process and structure, and the shift where the soap was being replenished didn't match, the quantity they were using. So I think for the dignity and the respect to our employees and learners out there, where we put them through stuff that I think is insulting to them, I think overall it's better results. I think it's frustrating if we take the time, we invest a ton of money and time and your skills, my skills, the SMEs, and everybody involved, and we're all disappointed at the end because it's not getting the result. Like this performance issue is not being fixed. And so I think if we do a proper diagnostic, we'll actually get better results. And in the end, then it's just a responsibility that I think we have to do this more responsibly, and to make sure we take a holistic approach. And then we are honest in saying, now that we've taken the time to do a proper diagnostic, I can see a learning tool is going to fix this part, but in order to get the results you want, you're also going to need to fix, the timing of the soap replenishment, and so that your strategy is going to encompass a number of things. And I think so that's the end of my rant, and so I can come back to the question being then, so what do I choose? Like, is it performance support? Usually it's a combination of things, so that if you've done the big picture diagnostics, you will know that maybe you need something more intensive. It might even need to be face-to-face. Perhaps then what will be needed after is ongoing support, and that can be done through a community of practice online. And so to me, it's very much a case by case. I mean, I gently compare it to a medical approach. So I'm not a medical doctor, so that's why I do it very gently. But I have validated that with a lot of doctors who have agreed. But it's about the prescription, making sure that we will get the best result if you do the proper diagnostic. If somebody walks in and says, I have a backache, and all you do is, give them, painkillers, it won't go away. And then plus you're developing an immunity even to the painkillers, which I think we're doing sometimes in learning. We're so quick to prescribe learning as a solution, or a webinar, or let's do a quick YouTube video. And all of those tools in and of themselves are extremely efficient. They just need to be prescribed, situation. And very often it's a holistic approach, and you're going to need a combination of formats and delivery methods.
It's interesting. I actually never thought about the fact that we are able to deliver things fairly quickly now online, that we might be sidestepping that initial analysis, which really is just going to be your roadmap for what is the best way to actually solve this problem. We really are in the problem solving business, not in the training business, as far as I'm concerned. What advice would you have for a novice instructional designer, basically the small one-person team, let's say, they got to do all these things, and they really want to make a difference and be proud of their work? What are those, do you think, core fundamental skills and knowledge they should develop to be successful?
I would say keep it small and related to what I was saying earlier. I would take the time to ask for the stories. So listen for the stories of what is behind this request. Tell me the story. So I use that a lot. Tell me the story of how we ended up sitting here, potentially working on this project. And then just do it interview style. And I think looking back, I think when I started, there is that eagerness to get started and deliver. And I think the advice would be that you will actually deliver better results if you take the time to not jump. And I would not be afraid to take the time to ask those questions and ask for the stories. I think you will gain so basically that approach touches on everything I've mentioned from the beginning in terms of it helps you build the relationship and build the rapport. It shows the respect for the content, and you're not going to jump without knowing more. And what I would have been afraid of is, this person, this client is going to think that, I'm wasting time. And I would say, don't be afraid of that, because you will gain the respect by the fact that you are asking questions and not jumping quickly and wanting to show that I know what to do. I know, what the solution is. The other advantage is that by really digging deeper and not jumping to the request, you will avoid then the person and your client basically getting a product and say, oh, that's not what I meant, or that's not what I wanted. And which can also be, as you can see from my body language, very deflating. But, everybody was so keen to get started that we didn't anticipate that. So you will avoid that experience as much as possible. And ultimately, I think if you also take the time to ask the questions and ask the stories and document the stories and validate the stories, will be to streamline it to the one piece that actually needs to be learned, the one piece. So of all the content that they want to put on, what I do, a trick perhaps, is that I get a sense of what is that one piece of content that is actually what will make the most difference in the performance. I use that as the first module in the prototype. And it's happened more than once where the other modules, so this project that was initially grandiose, say, you know what, now that we have this, that's all we need. The rest we can leave as PowerPoints because it's really just background information. So that goes a long way in terms of, so in fact, you saved yourself a lot of work, because if you go with the traditional approach, chances are the first module chapter is going to be an introductory chapter, the second, and so you don't get to the meat of the content until like the middle part. And so you've already put in a lot of work until they are satisfied that you're getting somewhere. So I often say, well, first off, we need a prototype. And so let me pick the module. And I strategically pick the module that I think will actually make the most difference, which might make other modules drop off. So if you are a department of one, you've just saved yourself a lot of work. At the same time, you achieve better results and you have a happy customer.
I have a word for that approach, or a phrase that I call it the lead domino. I do the same thing where it's like, what's that one little thing that's going to set it all off? And that's that. It's so, you're right. There's this eagerness to produce and show up, and I've got all these ideas, and it's the time, taking the time to ask those questions, develop that. And it's kind of neat how you said that this skill set alone is actually something that meets so many criteria in that relationship building. I really think that's really valid.
Yeah, and storytelling, I mean, is so powerful. It's the most ancient learning tool, but as a relationship builder, as a project management tool, as a conflict resolution tool. So it's my go-to.
That's awesome. So what do you say to people who might be skeptical of online training and argue that face-to-face approach will always be more effective or even preferred by the learner? How do you approach that conversation?
I say, good for you for your skepticism, because you should, and because we should be skeptical of all learning modalities. So I am convinced that it's like anything, it's form follows function. There is not one method that is better than another. The best method is the one that is aligned with the content, the context, and the learner. If there are times that, yeah, ideally could we train in some skills face to face, but if people because they're at a distance for security issues, they can't travel. When I analyze the context, so you can't ask me out of context, then while face to face is better than online. Well, in this context, it was better to give these people a remote training because otherwise there would have been no training at all. And they needed negotiation skills, management skills, and they were in a difficult situation. So in that situation, that was the best modality. So that's always my answer. Be skeptical, good for you always, because there isn't one size fits all.
Nice. So, okay. What is your favorite resource for learning?
Be a learner yourself. So if you're going to be in the business of learning and development, take workshops so you can watch others facilitate workshops and learn what works, what doesn't. Just get yourself out of your own, because we all tend to revolve around the same methods and approaches. So if you're developing online courses, you must be an online learner. So take other people's courses, again, to experience the suffering sometimes of bad design.
So true.
We've all done it. To me, you should not be a car engineer if you don't drive. And to that end, I would say also put yourself in the position of being an SME and force yourself to, similar to what you're doing in terms of developing tools related to your field. Probably the hardest online module I did was somebody asked me to do a 20-minute, I think they asked for 15 and I pushed on 20, on the equivalent of train the trainer. And which of course then is my field of expertise. And what was my reaction? You're insane. You cannot do that in 15 minutes. So I was put in the shoes what it's like to be a subject matter expert who's being told, no, you must distill it in 15 minutes. So I would say to all instructional designers out there to force yourself to create modules related to your own field. And so walk a mile in the shoes of your learners and walk a mile in the shoes of your subject matter expert. And you will make friends that way.
Okay, so what is a book that you think everybody should read? And I don't think it has to be learning related unless you think it's like a profound lesson.
So I won't name a specific book, but I am a bit of a geek, a scientific geek, and I do like to combine evidence-based approach to learning. And so things related to brain and neurology. And I mean, we're in the stages still as far as understanding the brain. And I'm sure 200 years from now we'll laugh and it will be the equivalent. What we're doing now is probably the equivalent of, the world is flat. And then we'll say, oh, those people, that was funny. Look what they were thinking. So I just think there's a lot to discover there. I love the concept of being a learning engineer. And even more so than maybe that's a geek in me, that I'm less of an artist and perhaps more of a scientist. And instead of instructional design, I like the word learning more than instructions, because again, it's focused on the experience. And I like the word engineering. And I do believe that even in engineering, there is art, and it's combining. What does an engineer do is combine all the different factors and pick the best tools, the best design that will, like a bridge needs to be designed differently based on the environment and the weather conditions. And so I'm following that trend and so reading as much as possible. And there's a group, I think, called Learning Engineers, and there's a push to make that more of what the profession of what we do is all about, and I'm biased toward that.
You just let out your inner geekdom. That's great.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Read more books on how people learn, and I it's kind of cool how you said it's about you like the learning aspect because it's about the experience, not the delivery of it. Yeah. Okay. So what was one of the best or most impactful lessons that you've learned in your career that you wish you had known maybe before or you want to impart on others?
Probably what I said earlier, that moment in my career where I was in charge of learning and development, and the annual report, like the performance of my department, was very much based on quantity and how many workshops and how many online or how many learning opportunities we provided and how many people participated. And I don't know exactly how, probably the 10th time that we got a request for conflict resolution from the same department. Then I thought, I'm missing something here, and why is it that I'm being rewarded as far as my performance? Because if I keep saying yes, technically I'm doing my job, because that's my performance target, is to continuously increase the number of workshops I offer, pardon me, and the number of participants. And that's where I came up with there's a lack of integrity here. There's a lack of respect even for the participants, because I'm not doing my job of doing a proper diagnosis. So I expanded my view and from learning and development to organizational development. And I pursued and I added people on my team that were experts in performance consulting and that more systems approach. And yeah, that change, I was able to convince the senior management or the board to say that it should be about results. It should not be about quantity. It's a mind shift, but it is possible. And to say that there's something wrong, like we should not be rewarding quantity, especially when you think about what's happening in a department. Where's the integrity in that? Where the more there is conflict in that department, the more I will be rewarded, because the more they will come for workshops, and the more I will make my department look good. And so the day I made that shift in my mind, that it said no, that lacks integrity. Just like doctors should not be rewarded on how many prescriptions and how many pills they sell. What I liked about it is, because my bias is, as much as it is on the science side, it's also a very humanistic approach. And I thought I need to look at the whole system, and I cannot treat all performance issues as a learning and skills development issues. So I would say, if ideally I would have made that realization sooner, but it is part of an evolution. And if maybe watching this video encourages somebody to do needs assessment from a systems approach, and you can Google all those technical words, and there are tons of HPI, like human performance improvement. Like it was just like it was a door. Once I opened that door, I realized it was like the whole sector I was missing out on. And in fact, the learning and development was one piece of the puzzle that was meant to contribute to that. So I still felt very passionate but even better about my learning and development piece, knowing that now it was, when I realized it was actually part of a bigger puzzle, and I could make my piece even more effective.
That's fabulous advice. And also it seems like you shifted to become this advocate for the learner. Versus the what can I do, and it being functioning separately from what you do. Okay. So
and if I may add, because then now I realize that when you develop even those rough prototypes, one thing that has saved me so much time, so much grief in the decision-making process, is to ask for 3 learners, 3 of the members of the audience that we're targeting, to even have a say, even at the rough mock-up stage. Because as you no, like some of the most benign decisions can become quite contentious. And in fact, like, do we use a cartoon character or don't we? And then you can really butt heads. And until you just say, you know what, we're not the right people to be making that decision. Who's the audience? Let's go to the audience. So I now make it a rule that we don't make and we don't proceed until I can at least check with. Sometimes I have to say, just give me one, give me access to one learner, because we should not be making these decisions. And so, sorry, I forgot to mention that earlier, but that you put your finger on that particular point when they said that's when the shift about the employee being an employee advocate in the case of workforce development and being a learner advocate. Absolutely.
Thank you. That's fantastic advice. I know I end up begging too. It's like, please, just one, at least one. But 3 is fantastic. I think you even need more than that, right? 3 to 5 is like, wow, optimal. So yeah, it's fabulous. Okay. So thank you. This is awesome. Now, if somebody wants to get in touch or learn more about the work you do or work with you, where should they go?
You mentioned at the beginning my called Currents Group. So you can go to currentsgroup.com and you will see that I invest most of my work in learning and development, not in website development. But it is a good place to reach me, or just Dominique at currentsgroup.com.
So reach out directly to Dominique, and I will also put all the links to the website and the email underneath the video so that people can just click and go. Awesome. Thank you.
You're listening to the E-Learning Scenario Design Podcast with Anna Zabramowitz.